So what is the role of genetics in healthcare, and how is it impacting the world's expectations of healthcare? Well, I definitely think that people are starting to do a lot of more of their own research into the role genetics plays, and people are starting to also formulate their own opinions, sometimes without good, reliable data. So we really need to be kind of on the top of our game. We need to be aware of what's out there and be able to research the questions that people have so that we can give them good, solid information. I think people are also starting to be more aware of the different, I guess, genetic risk factors that are out there, and are wanting to be involved in more health screenings and testings. And so healthcare providers need to have more access to these screenings and testings to accommodate the public. What ethical dilemmas might we face in healthcare with the advancements of genetics? Well, I think a big thing that I think we're already kind of starting to see a little bit is the ability to control different traits and attributes when having children. I have a friend who, she and her husband both carry the gene that produces a rare form of hemophilia in male children. They happen to have had 2 male children, both with this disease. It's been, definitely a really hard thing for their family. It's a very sort of debilitating disease. And they both really wanted to have another child, but knew that they ran the risk of, if they were to have another male, that there was a huge percentage that male would have the hemophilia disease as well. So through some sort of genetic testing, which I am actually not sure how it works, but they were able to basically manipulate the genetics to produce a female child that did not have the disease. And so I guess the question there is, when does that become unethical? They were doing this they manipulated genes to produce a female child so that they did not have to have another child that had to live with a debilitating disease. Is that okay? Is that not okay? And when can you take that too far? I mean, in this instances, it was to prevent a disease. But are people going to start pushing it too far and just saying, I want my kids to have blonde hair, or I want my kids to have blue eyes, or you're picking the genetic traits of your child, and is that okay? And so that's one of the questions. I think another one too is when you are tested for for different genes, do the results of that stay with you and cause problems throughout your life? I have another friend who, she and her husband both carry the gene that produces a very rare genetic and terminal disease called Pompe. And there's a 25% chance that any child that they have can have this disease. They didn't know this until they had their second child, who was positive for having this disease. They have their first child does not have the disease, but also runs the risk of carrying the gene. So they had the decision to make of, do we get our other son tested for the gene? And they ultimately decided no, because of a couple of reasons. Well, they didn't want whatever the results of that, if the results were positive, they didn't want that to follow him for the rest of his life and cause complications as far as insurance goes, or maybe jobs, or things like that. So they chose to not have him tested and let him make the decision for himself when he's older, if he wants to be tested himself. But then does that also cause an ethical dilemma because you're not testing someone that could possibly have a very rare gene that could cause a very rare disease? So the question is, when should you and when should you not, I guess, do the testing? I think that, in my personal opinion, in both of those instances, I agree that they made decisions that were good. Those decisions were good and probably best for their families. How does the media impact the public's perception of treating and screening for genetic disorders? Well, the media tends to generalize the idea of race. When people hear the word Latino, they assume all Latinos are the same, and then therefore they will have all the same risks. They don't often take into account different things like lifestyle, family history, geographical region, environment, stuff like that. Also, like Dr. Howard Levy in the video Race, Genetics, and Healthcare stated, just because you have the BRCA gene doesn't mean you will get breast cancer. Angelina Jolie is a good example of this. The media highlighted her decision to have a mastectomy as preventative treatment for breast cancer after a diagnosis of the BRCA1 gene. I think the media made it sound like possibly a better option than it really was. I don't necessarily think that this is the right decision for most people. It's very cost effective. It is very risky as well. A lot of, medical issues can arise from having, a mastectomy in the first place. And it still does not cut out your chances of getting breast cancer by 100%. There's still a risk. Not to mention, there are other risks that play into getting breast cancer, and you may cut out the risk of getting breast cancer because of this gene, but there are other things that come into play as well. So I think the media makes things like this maybe sound a little bit better than they are. So that's about it.